Ko was an ugly loser who fumbled every chance he had to find love and eventually gave up on trying. However, his life took a drastic turn after he accidentally rizzed up a freaky vampire girl who became obsessed with sucking the life out of him. It all started on the night Ko decided to put on his big boy pants and snuck out. Being outside so late, with nothing but the streetlights keeping him company, felt like the right thing to deal with his insomnia, so he took a walk and ended up at the playground. While on the swings, he thought back to the day he found a letter from a hottie in his class and turned her down because he didn't know how to handle her plot cannons. Her friends tracked him down after school and explained how stupid he was for fumbling the only baddie who thought he deserved a shot. After the swing almost sent him to the ER, he stopped by a bench and almost crapped his pants when a notification came in. Luckily, it wasn't his parents, so he kept walking around. A couple of minutes later, he found a vending machine and thought it would be a good idea to get his first beer. Right as he pushed the button, a mysterious girl named Nazuna showed up and asked if it was his first time. He immediately tried to run off, but she held him back and apologized for the jump scare. Despite still being a bit skeptical, her blue eyes made it hard for the lonely virgin to think straight. So he walked with her until they found 3 drunks at a bus stop. She then teased them, knowing their brains were too fried for a proper conversation, and kept leading Ko through the empty street. When she stopped to tell him how freeing it was to do whatever he wanted at night, he ran back to try messing with the deadbeat fathers again. After that, she offered to help fix his insomnia back at her place, and he followed like the slow-brained nutjob he was. Once they got inside, she took off her jacket, revealing a hot bod that Ko knew was way out of his league. Like that wasn't enough, she told him to get into her bed, but he was smart enough to know that offer was too good to be true and tried to escape. Once again, a couple of sweet words were enough to change his mind, so he got in the futon and tried to play it cool while she stared deep into his soul. He then turned to his side and pretended to be asleep to see what she was up to. After checking to be sure he had slept off, she revealed her fangs and proceeded to drain a few pints of his blood while he was frozen in horror. Once she was done, he got back up and she tried to blame it on a mosquito bite, but the blood on her mouth made the lies hard to believe. With his heart trembling in fear, he asked if he was also going to become a vampire, but she told him to stop believing comic book stories because it wasn't that simple. She then tried to change the topic, but losing almost half his blood to a mysterious hottie made it hard for Ko to focus on anything else. To make him feel better, she took him to the park and explained that a human had to be in love with the vampire biting them to get turned. That immediately brought back memories of his sad life, but after watching her levitate in the air, he asked for permission to fall in love with her so he could get turned. She was initially shocked and tried to turn him down, but he kept insisting, so she agreed, knowing it would mean getting a free meal whenever she wanted. To really introduce him to the nightlife, she took him up to a really high rooftop and made him believe it was all for the views. The next moment, she kicked him off the edge and almost gave him a heart attack before catching him and taking him on a joyride. The next night, he snuck out again to see her, and she took her time explaining how their little arrangement could lead to a freaky situation. Hearing all that creeped him out, so he told her to stop talking about it so he could actually fall in love and not have to worry about protecting his little sausage. The next time he snuck out, finding her became an issue as she didn't show up at the usual spot. After over an hour of walking through random streets, she finally showed and said she was out looking for another rondo with tasty blood. He then pulled down his shirt and asked why she didn't just wait to take his, but she immediately told him to cover it up. To make finding each other a bit easier, he suggested exchanging numbers, but she could not remember her digits and decided to take him back to her place. After showing off her cakes, she brought out a phone from the Stone Age and said she hated the idea of having to get a new one every decade. He still tried to make it work, but she hated the idea of carrying it around all day and told him to get in the futon. Moments later, she got tired of waiting and asked if she could take a drink, but he refused and told her to go find someone else since she already spent most of the night doing that. Realizing that he was feeling jealous, she leaned over him and said she had actually been looking for him the entire time because his blood was the best she had tasted. After letting her take as much as she wanted, they both spent some time sleeping before he went back home. He spent the following night searching for her again until she showed up and asked if he had any new ideas for contacting each other. Just then, he showed her a transceiver watch he bought for the both of them so they wouldn't have to worry about using a phone. She was curious to know why he knew about transceivers since he never had anyone to play with, so he told her about the time he got a pair out of curiosity. He left the second one on a mailbox, hoping that it would lead to a friendship with anyone who found it. After some time, he checked back and saw that it was gone. Since no one had reached out, he locked it away ever since, but decided to wear it so Mizuna could see, but she couldn't stop laughing at how pathetic his social life was. Afterwards, they separated to test it out before she flew him across the city and ended up at his school. They then talked about how boring an average life was before she took some blood and started making culture jokes. Hearing those made Ko remember how she would get shy whenever he said something about love, so he asked if she would like a special nickname to get a reaction. Shortly after that, he started heading back home and was taking a look at the old transceiver watch when he got a message on it and saw a chick named Akira. Seeing her with the watch confused him, so he asked how she got it, and she reminded him that he had actually left it on her mailbox back then. He was also curious to know why she had not used it since then, so she explained how his lone wolf attitude made her think he no longer wanted to be friends. She had only sent the message because he recently stopped coming to school and was lucky enough to bump into him. A trip down memory lane then reminded him of the day she met him at the park, watching insects, and decided to become his first friend. After thanking her for checking in, he asked why she was in uniform when it was only 4 in the morning. She then told him about her habit of taking long walks before school and asked if they could start meeting up at the same time, since she was likely not going to see him during the day. A couple of nights later, Nazuna teased him by asking if he had a new love interest because he had been leaving her place a lot earlier than usual, but he freaked out and swore it was nothing before heading out. Several minutes later, he was at a park bench with Akira, trying to make small talk and thinking it was weird that she liked talking to him every day. He almost deluded himself into thinking that she wanted his magic stick. But then he saw a familiar shadow hiding behind a tree and almost crapped his pants. As Nazuna got closer, he almost went nuts with fear, thinking she had diabolical plans for Akira, but she just wanted to make fun of him for sneaking off to see a girl at night. Seeing the way they both talked to each other, Akira asked if they were a couple and told Ko that being in love with a night crawler was not a good enough reason to ditch school. Before he could explain things, Nazuna made him stand up and took a long drink from his neck right in front of her so she could understand that he was merely her dumb simp she used for dinner. Moments later, they went to a cafe to order drinks and talk about it, but all Akira mostly brought up was Ko's decision to ditch school. When Nazuna told her to stop acting like it was such a big deal, she pressed even harder and told him to come back because she missed seeing him around. Unable to tell her about his dream to become a low-budget Dracula, he blamed his decision on school being boring and a lack of friends. After Akira reminded him that no one found algebra class interesting and told him to stop coming up with shit excuses, she asked why he thought living as an illiterate blood bank was any better. Tired of her self-righteous yapping, Nazuna asked why she took so long to reach out since she claimed to be a good friend and left. Akira immediately tried to continue the conversation, but he left her some money for the drinks and ran off to stop Nazuna. Unable to understand why she got upset, he kept asking and told her to stop expecting him to read her mind, causing her to get pissed off. After she took off, he tried to keep up and ended up searching everywhere with no luck. He eventually tried to climb up a bridge and almost lost his jaw in the process, so he got seated and hoped she would answer on the transceiver. Thankfully, she did, and he carefully explained how being socially awkward made it hard for him to understand people's feelings before asking if she could just tell him why she got upset. The next moment, she showed up and said she didn't like how he lied when Akira asked why he was ditching school. He then explained how weird it would be to tell her about his true intentions, but by then, Nazuna had become more curious about the blood on his cheek and asked about it. Just as he told her about the fall, she pulled him in for a kiss to clean out the blood and said she couldn't wait to see him again before taking off. Akira spent the next day in class realizing why Ko decided to drop out in the first place and immediately went home afterward to wax her melons and get some sleep. A few hours later, Ko snuck out to see his girl, but a flashback of the kiss gave him second thoughts. For the first time since they started seeing each other, she was already at a park waiting for him, and that only made him a lot more nervous, so he decided to take a walk instead. He ended up close to the bridge after a while and saw the deadbeat fathers from the other night talking about a couple who were having a special moment together. Seeing that, Ko realized that kisses were usually for people who were in love with each other, leading him to believe that his mission to love Nazuna was already a success. Just as he began celebrating, she found him and demanded to know why he wasn't at the usual spot, but he immediately told her to get to sucking so he could transform. She was initially confused by the enthusiasm, so he explained his discovery of love, and she granted his wish by drinking as much as she could. After a few minutes of feeling like the exact same loser he had always been, he asked if the transformation was a long one. She then told him to stop being delusional because he was clearly mistaking the tingly sensation in his pants for love, and he felt a combination of disappointment and plain stupidity. She tried to make fun of him, but he told her to stop because it was his first kiss, and he expected it to be a bit more magical. To make him feel better, she confessed to also being a first-timer but claimed it was nothing to get worried about since it was normal to exchange mouth juices with friends. The next night, Akira also developed insomnia and decided to start her day in the middle of the night. shocking Ko, who had just left his place to go see Nazuna. After a long conversation to be sure she wasn't losing her touch with reality, he offered to take her to Nazuna's instead. Moments later, they were at her place trying to play games, but she wouldn't stop saying cultured stuff. So Akira asked if she had done anything with Ko yet, and she told her about the kiss. Immediately worried for her friend, she reminded him that Nazuna was still a mythical monster strong enough to yank off his head without breaking a sweat. After promising to do no such thing, Nazuna brought out another game, and they kept playing until it started getting early. When Nazuna told Ko to get in bed, Akira started freaking out again, so she decided to take it a step further by taking his blood right in front of her. Once again, she asked why Nazuna was using him as a blood bank, so she explained that it was a consensual agreement between the both of them. Akira was more curious to know what Ko was getting out of it, so he told her about his goal, expecting another freakout, but she was actually impressed that he had enough brain power left to work towards something. That feeling quickly went sour when he explained that he had to fall in love with her first, and she immediately tried to head back home, but it had started raining by then, leaving her with no choice but to have a three-way with both of them. While Nazuna fell asleep shortly after that, Akira stayed up to have a talk with Ko and promised to keep being his friend even if he were to become a blood-hungry delinquent. Moments later, she also hit the snooze button, expecting to take a short nap since school was starting in barely 2 hours, but she woke up in the middle of the day and rushed out, hoping the teachers wouldn't notice. Later on, Nazuna woke up and tried to pass the time playing games, but after a few hours she got bored and remembered a special delivery she was expecting. After heading down and seeing that they had skipped her, she tried to find something else to do inside, but being too broke to get some nice things for her place made that impossible, so she decided to head out a little earlier than usual. While walking through the city, she found a stray cat and spent a few minutes playing with it until she caught a whiff of its sewage-soaked fur and deeply regretted it. With the usual meetup with Ko being just an hour away, she decided to visit a hot spring to get cleaned up. After telling the loner at the counter to watch out for a buzz on the transceiver, she went in to take a bath and prayed for the day she would finally be able to see her own reflection. The next moment, Ko dialed in, and she immediately ran out to meet him, but seeing her hair and freshly waxed drumsticks made him realize that she was more than a blood-hungry creep. She then tried to tease him for acting weird, but he seriously couldn't say a single word as her beauty left him speechless. To get his mind out of the gutter, she made him spend some time in the bath as well, but when he came out, her deadly face card was still affecting his depraved mind. Thinking he was back to normal, she took him outside to talk, but all he could think about were all the things they had done together and how he felt about her. When she snapped him out of it, he told her to take a drink to see if it would calm his nerves, so she pulled him in close and kept going until he began to feel dizzy. He immediately pointed out what he thought would be a nice spot to relax, but it turned out to be a special motel for freaky creeps. After trying to break the bed, Nazuna asked if he was still stressed over his emotions and explained how they affected the taste of his blood. He then told her that having cultured thoughts towards her felt wrong since they were still just friends, but she told him to stop trying to hide from his emotions because they made the blood taste better. Afterwards, they stopped at a bridge to take in the late-night view, and she saw one of her old blood banks walking the street below. Realizing that his blood wasn't the first she had taken, he asked if she attacked her victims like the vampires he had read about. To his surprise, she took him back to her place to explain how she lured in victims by offering herself up as a cuddle buddy. He immediately asked if she gave happy endings, but she swore it was nothing like that and made him pick the massage package. The next moment, he was on the ground trying to focus on the massage, but the sight of her glistening drumsticks on his back made it hard to think of anything else. To make matters worse, she moved over to start from his head and hovered her box over it, while explaining how the massage would put her unsuspecting client into a deep sleep so she could take as much as she wanted. After the massage, she then taught him about pressure points before reaching in to take another drink, but then the doorbell rang. A young hottie who she once gave a massage to was back for another, but she was already tired and told Ko to do it instead. Despite having no social life, he actually managed to welcome her in properly, but he then went to get Nazuna, who was already gaming. She still refused to do it herself and told him to simply repeat what she did to him, but his balls were not big enough to handle such a hottie. After even offering to split the pay with him, Nazuna realized that he needed a stronger source of motivation and promised to give him another kiss as a reward. Earlier that night, Kiyosumi got dropped off by a coworker and thought back to the day Nazuna found her at a park and sent her to paradise with her magic touch. Hoping to relive the experience, she stopped by and was disappointed by the obviously inexperienced virgin who welcomed her. But after Nazuna promised him a kiss, something changed, and Kiyosumi could sense it. Without wasting any time, he went straight to it and took a few minutes to find her special spot before making her toes curl. At a certain point, she asked for his age and was shocked when he told her, so she asked why he was working as a masseuse. After admitting it was his first day on the job, he told her about his newfound love for the nightlife and said getting the job was all part of the experience. She then asked about school, and he told her about his decision to drop out because of how boring it was. Instead of threatening to call the authorities, she claimed to understand his desire for freedom and said she once went down the same route when she was his age. Their conversation started getting a lot deeper as she told him about how sad her work life was and broke down in tears. Just then, her boss started calling to give her a new assignment, and she reluctantly wobbled over to answer. But knowing she once had the same mindset he currently had, Ko decided to do something about it. Once she hung up the phone, he refused to let her leave and promised to put her to sleep with a mind-blowing massage. However, she insisted on leaving, so he blocked the door and called Nazuna. Kiyosumi watched in shock as Nazuna phased through the wall and listened to Ko, who then told her to make sure she couldn't leave for work. The next moment, Nazuna tossed her out the window to grant his wish, and it took Kiyosumi a few seconds to fully realize that she was about to meet the Grim Reaper. After both Ko and Nazuna saved her, she took a moment to catch her breath before Ko apologized and said he just didn't like the fact that she was trapped in the Matrix. Hearing that, Kiyosumi told him to stop being so naive because pain and suffering were part of being an adult. But then he decided to tell her why he was actually with Nazuna. Before she could call him crazy, he said she was the crazy one for answering a boss that calls her for work in the middle of the night. She then took a moment to laugh at how stupid his goals sounded, so he walked into the middle of the street to show her how freeing it was. After joining him and admitting to secretly wanting to live like a hipster, she still chose to get back to work and wished him luck on becoming a vampire. Sensing her deep desire for freedom, he then promised to also turn her if he managed to accomplish his goal, and hoped that would be enough to make her work a little less depressing. After she took her things and left, Nazuna asked why he boldly made such a promise knowing what it actually meant. He tried to ask if she was talking about having Kiyosumi fall in love with him, but Nazuna still found love difficult to talk about, so they changed the topic. With nothing else to do for the rest of the night, he asked if she could take him to a late-night pool party and regretted it moments later when he got there. Seeing so many cakes and melons was a bit too much for his slow brain. But then Nazuna finally showed up and chose to be fully dressed for some reason. After giving him a peek at her goods, she went to get a drink and stole everyone's attention with her beauty. However, Ko was already used to it after sleeping next to her for weeks. His chill guy attitude suddenly changed when he saw two guys trying to rizz her up. She noticed how jealous it made him feel and decided to play along with the guys until he switched to alpha mode and pulled her away. Moments later, she apologized for messing with his fragile emotions, but he claimed it was being around so many creeps that pissed him off. To make him feel better, she flew him to a pool at his school and dove straight into it before showing off her melons to distract him so she could take a sip.
You sussy baka!
Days later, he had just left the house for a walk when he heard someone call his name and thought he was about to get caught. Luckily, it was just Kiyosumi, who had taken some time off work and brought him to a vending machine to properly thank him for the other night with a soda. After she left, he stood there thinking about what life would be like if he actually managed to turn her. But then it started to rain, so he ran off to find shelter. After getting to a spot under the bridge, he saw a hottie named Sari turning down a suitor and waved when she caught him staring. He immediately tried to get back to his soda, but she walked over and sat beside him to talk. He then asked about her suitor, and she tried to explain her taste in men, but he had lost his senses to her cakes and smooth skin. When she noticed and teased him about it, he tried to apologize, but she said it was cool and proceeded to pop out her milkers for him to see. After letting him stare for a few minutes, she took the rest of his soda and started walking off. Bewitched by her beauty, he followed and kept listening to whatever she said until she suddenly hugged him and tried to drain his blood. Just then, Nazuna flew in and ripped off her arm in an instant before threatening to take off the rest of her limbs if she touched him again. Sari then called her a weirdo for choosing to mess around with a delusional virgin and reminded her of the rule against humans knowing about them without getting turned. To solve it, she tried to finish him off, but Nazuna was faster and rearranged her guts with a nasty kick. The next moment, another vampire equipped with an entire bakery at the rear dropped in and told Sari to keep her busy before taking off with him. Minutes later, they got to a rooftop where 3 other vampires were waiting to meet him. Before he could say anything, Nico told him to choose which of them he found attractive so they could turn him because it was dangerous to let him keep his humanity with everything he already knew about them. To their greatest surprise, he told them not to bother since he only wanted Nazuna, triggering centuries worth of insecurities as they all couldn't believe someone was capable of rejecting them. Nico then told him about their influence and popularity to see if it would change his mind, but he couldn't care less, so she made him sit close to her to charm him with her touch. Midori and the others could already see that she was using her signature playbook to win him over, but then he asked why Riko was acting like she hated Nazuna when they were very similar. She immediately flared up and said she would never be like such an unpopular loser, but then he asked why Nazuna was unpopular since she looked a lot better than the rest of them. While they were explaining Nazuna's controversial decision to live a very mundane life, Siri had just taken a break from getting pummeled to ask if she was just messing with him. She then explained that keeping him around was extremely dangerous and offered to either turn or end him. But Nazuna still couldn't admit to the fact that she really enjoyed his company. By then, Midori had taken over from Nico and walked over to play mind games on him, but he easily rejected her as well, thinking he just wanted to play around with Nazuna. They made him understand that he had to get turned or they would have to send him up to the Lord to keep themselves protected. Just as he told them about his mission to fall in love with Nazuna, she dropped in and stayed on the ground to hide her embarrassment. When he tried to help her up, she told him not to bother, and the girls suggested being a little less bitchy so she could actually have a life. Tired of hearing their unwanted advice, she tried to leave, but they stopped her and demanded to know why she was suddenly so interested in him after rejecting their way of life. Ko then explained their arrangement, hoping it would clear up any misunderstanding, but they still found their relationship a little sus and asked for more details. After he admitted to being the one who wanted to fall in love in the first place, they gave it some thought and promised to stop meddling on the condition that she speed things up. He then swore to continue trying to fall for her even if it took a couple of years, but they all gave him in weird, causing him to realize that something was off. Seeing that Nazuna wasn't ready to break the news, Nico told him that humans had a time limit of 1 year to get turned after their first bite, meaning that if he failed to fall in love with her by then, he could never get turned again. Nazuna acted like it was nothing to worry about, so the girls got back to drinking, but she decided to leave an impression and pulled him in for a steamy smooch before taking off. Afterwards, he met up with Akira and told her about the time limit, thinking she would find it interesting, but she realized that he didn't really understand what it meant and suggested going back to school because his brain clearly needed some juice. She then reminded him of the fact that vampires viewed humans who knew about their existence as a threat, meaning that they would send him to the great beyond if he failed to get turned.
Oh, hell no!
Realizing the danger he was in, he begged for advice to speed up the mission, and Akira tried her best to give him some advice before leaving him in the playground to start her day. She kept thinking about it while making her way to class and almost stepped on a drooling sleazebag named Maharu, who she actually knew. After apologizing for taking a nap before classes, he told her about his recent decision to embrace the nightlife, which shocked her because he had always been an ideal student. He went on to say that it was actually because of a certain love interest who could apparently only come out at night, and she immediately asked if the girl was a vampire. However, he skipped the question to talk about Ko. He had also noticed that the loner decided to drop out and wanted to be sure he was okay, so she told him not to worry too much about it before they started heading to class. When they got to his class, he told her to extend his greetings to Ko whenever they saw each other again and left. But Akira was a bit more intrigued by his love story and spent the day stalking him to get more information. That night, Suri found Ko on a street and tried to talk, but after recalling what happened the other night, he tried to run away. After getting him to calm down a bit, she asked about his love mission, and he told her all about his lack of experience and fear that it might never actually happen. Hearing the innocence in his voice almost made Siri go insane, but she kept herself under control and promised to help him get his love life on track. Moments later, he went to Nazuna's place and asked to take her on a date, but she immediately turned him down. He then tried to get her off the game so they could talk about it, but she refused, so he turned it off and almost got his heart ripped out. He eventually managed to convince her and took her out to see a rom-com, but after putting up with it for a few minutes, she threatened to drain every drop of blood he had left for thinking she was into stuff like that. Once they got back outside, he checked the perfect date list Sari gave him earlier on and took her to a cafe to ask for her thoughts on the movie. Realizing that something was off about him, she asked why he suddenly wanted to go on a date. But Siri had specifically told him to keep her involvement secret because Nazuna hated her guts. Before he could think of a lie, she grabbed the list and recognized Siri's handwriting, causing her to get pissed. After she left, he went back to his place and kept cursing himself for being so stupid, while she tried to pass the time playing games. A few hours later, he was still in bed thinking about everything when she showed up at his window and flew him across the city to show him what a real date felt like. Much later, he lost sight of her and was trying to get to the usual spot when he saw Maharu with a bunch of friends across the street and kept his head down to avoid detection. The next moment, Maharu caught up to him and asked if they could talk before heading to the park together. Ko asked if he was cool with leaving his friends, but he said it wouldn't be a problem and was more curious to know what he had been up to. Hearing that took him back to when he actually enjoyed being alive and made him realize that Maharu was a big part of that. They both kept talking about random stuff until Akira showed up and nearly gave them a heart attack in the process. After Ko told Maharu about her messed up sleep routine, she also told him about Ko's addiction to Nazuna. Maharu was shocked to hear that he was actually spending time with a girl and wanted to talk about it a little while longer. But he remembered scheduling a meetup with his girl and explained it to them before leaving. Moments later, Nazuna saw him walking with the mystery girl before Ko finally found her. To reward his efforts, she asked for his hand and locked fingers to keep him from getting lost again. A few nights later, Siri was outside looking through her roster for a new simp to mess with, but one particular beta kept trying to reach her. Before she could delete his details, she picked up Ko's scent and tried to get a hug, but Kazuna's knee shattered her face and sent her flying in the other direction. She asked Ko if he was okay, but he was more worried about Siri, who then tried to snap Mizuna's neck and kept exchanging blows with her for several minutes. When they eventually called a timeout, she swore it was nothing like what happened the other night, but Nazuna still found it suspicious since she was the one always talking about how having regular relationships with humans was dangerous. After apologizing for trying to jump him, she started heading out, but Ko chased after her to ask if she was really okay. Realizing that he was talking about the conversation they had under the bridge, she claimed it was all a lie she spun to make him follow her. He still thought there was more to the story and wanted to talk about it, so she took him to a karaoke place and was surprised Nazuna had not tried to terminate her again. After he said she left to take care of something personal, Sari reminded him of her fame with the local simps and explained how difficult it was to deal with their insecurities. To avoid the topic entirely, she told him to choose a song, and after a grueling couple of minutes, he picked one from the 19th century, causing her to wonder what Nazuna actually saw in him. After the song, they tried to talk about something else, but a creep suddenly showed up and kept banging at the door while calling her name. Freaked out, Ko asked if he should call the police, but she said it was just part of being a famous baddie. The continuous banging started to terrify him, so he asked if she could take care of it, but then she said the best option would be to end him. Ko immediately tried to stop her, but she got pissed and told him to stop thinking human rules applied to her. Just then, the stupid simp named Ekihito opened the door to ask if she was okay and almost got his throat ripped out, but Ko managed to push him out at the last moment. They both made a run for it and caught their breaths in an alley close by before Ko asked why he was so obsessed with her. Seeing how the question affected him made Ko realize that he actually had feelings for her, so he asked for all the details to know how he got to that point. Akihito then told him about the night he tripped and met Sari for the first time. They both went to a restaurant that night and got to know each other, but while she just found him a little interesting, he quickly became obsessed and realized that he had fallen in love with her. Just as Ko was about to give him some advice, Sari caught up to them and told him to move. Akihito was still confused about the attack, so she told him the truth and said he had to go since she wasn't interested in turning a simp. Despite being terrified, Ko stepped in to defend him, so Sari decided to take him out first. Immediately she charged in, Nazuna dropped and pinned her to the ground. Sari then promised to spare Ko, but then Nazuna asked why she was so eager to end the four-eyed simp because she had never actually clapped a human. Before she could say anything, Ekihito said it was all his fault because he fell in love with her when she was only looking for a friend. Sari then confessed to hating the rule against having regular relationships with humans, and Nazuna decided to release her. The next moment, Ko went off and called her a psycho for trying to unalive a chill dude just because she wanted to be his friend. He and Nazuna then gave them both some space to talk, and Sari initially tried to part ways with him, but losing the only human friend she had turned out to be a lot harder than she expected, causing her to start bawling her eyes out. Realizing the pain his obsession had caused, he told her to turn him instead so she wouldn't have to worry about not talking to him again. He also accepted that his love for her would never be reciprocated, so she accepted and sunk her fangs into his arm to transform him. After Nazuna teased Ko because he had to watch someone else achieve the one thing he desperately wished for, they went back to the karaoke place to celebrate. A few nights later, Midori was out handing out flyers for her Maid cafe and made a bunch of hopeless otakus promise to stop by. After they left, she got a text from one of the girls working at the cafe who wanted to call in sick and knew she had to find a new maid to keep her customers satisfied. Knowing her vampire friends would want all the attention of her customers, she racked her brain trying to think of someone who didn't really care about popularity. Just then, Nazuna showed up with Ko, and Midori immediately started begging that she was the perfect person for the job. Moments later, Nazuna was at the cafe in her maid's outfit, while Ko felt out of place and asked if there was any way he could help. Remembering how he brutally rejected her, Midori decided to make him regret it and made him leave the store for a few minutes before giving him the official welcome. Once he got seated, she tried to introduce Nazuna like she would with the usual maids, but the wannabe thug went off script and started to piss her off. Realizing that her outburst was affecting the customers, she promised to pay Nazuna for good behavior and demonstrated her skills by charming one of her regulars. The fact that he was a middle-aged man definitely made things a lot easier for Midori, who was secretly hoping Ko would see that she was hotter than Nazuna. Just then, another maid named Arisa served him coffee and also tried to charm him, but he told her not to put too much effort since he wasn't an actual customer. Arisa then told him that she was once the most popular maid before Midori joined them and quickly took the top spot. After work that day, Midori tried to take a few pics for the cafe, but she got a text about a bunch of cultured pics an anonymous creep was uploading from the cafe. Ko and Nazuna also took a look, but Ko was especially focused on taking everything in until they both verbally assaulted him. They then realized that the girl getting creeped on was Arisa, so Midori asked Ko for his help figuring out who the culprit was. The next night, he began his investigation by carefully observing the pics of her melons. But then she showed up and caught him in the act. He then tried to explain, but she already knew about the photos and his little investigation, so he kept looking around for clues. After finding a balcony and realizing that the culprit probably took them from there, he left so she could get changed and tried to access the balcony with Nazuna, but it was locked. With her help, he went out back and got up to figure out how the culprit took them, but after Nazuna climbed in and struck a weird pose for the pic, he discovered the truth. A few minutes before closing, he asked Midori if there was somewhere to hide in the changing room and told Nazuna to get into position before they both entered one of the lockers together. When Arisa got inside to change, he tried to explain his plan to catch the culprit in the act, but Midori's mega melons made it hard to channel his inner Sherlock Holmes. Just then, they heard the window open, and he said something about suspecting Arisa before busting the locker open and catching her in the act. Nazuna then snatched her phone and saw that she was the one taking the pictures with the timer, so they asked for an explanation. After she got dressed, Ko explained how he started suspecting her when he noticed that the pictures were too perfect and conveniently didn't show her actual kitty, which would normally be a creep's main objective. He then asked her why, but Midori took over and reminded them that Arisa was the most popular maid before she got there, meaning that she was desperate to take back her crown and leaked her snaps for attention. Before Arisa could defend herself, Midori said it was nothing to worry about because all baddies are usually sick in the head and would do anything for validation. Days later, Arisa stopped by despite having the day off and told Ko that she had learned to accept the fact that she was an attention-seeking hoe. She then showed him her latest selfie and made him pose so she could take another one for the gram. Weeks later, Nazuna finally managed to get some stuff for her place and told Ko that she wanted to take her business a bit more seriously. With that said, she sent him out to find their next client. He then spent a few minutes searching for someone sad enough to follow him back to her place until he found a stoner named Anko. He first tried to get acquainted and was worried that she would find it weird, but she easily responded and took him to a nearby restaurant. When he finally got around to explaining the offer, she pointed out the fact that his job was illegal and watched the panic build up in his eyes before claiming it was all a joke. She then asked about the massage to get some relief from her hectic life as a detective, but he forgot all about that and only wanted to know if her job was half as interesting as the rumors he had heard about it. After handing over her card, she told him it was definitely not all sunshine and rainbows before saying she was actually looking for someone. The next moment, she brought out a picture of Akihito and asked if he had seen him around recently. Seeing the look in his eyes as he forced himself to say no got her intrigued, so she pulled him in and asked for the truth. The sudden switch-up left him too stunned to speak, so she let go and told him to reach out if he ever needed help before leaving. Later on, he met up with Akira and Maharu, who wanted to bring back the spark of their friendship and made them sneak into school to solve a bunch of scary mysteries he had heard over the years. After going across campus debunking all the rumors, they took a break to talk about it, and that reminded Maharu of one particular legend about a teacher that went missing 10 years ago. According to the rumors, he would occasionally show up in a specific class from time to time, so they decided to go check it out. Like all the others, they were expecting to find nothing and laugh about it. But when Maharu slid the door open, the rumored teacher was standing right there. Too scared to move a muscle, they watched as he turned and blamed them for being there before attacking Akira. One look at his fangs made Ko realize that he was a vampire, but the teacher's mannerisms left him in shock while Maharu kept trying to pull him off Akira. Ko eventually snapped out of it and used a chair to slam the teacher away, causing him to regain his sanity for a moment. Just as he told them to run away, they heard footsteps and saw Anko, who then offered up her blood to the starving teacher. He immediately pounced, and she held him close so he could take enough, but the taste irritated him, causing her to realize that he had never taken human blood before. She then asked why, and he told her about the 10 years he had spent in painful isolation just to avoid harming anyone. Ko thought it was dumb and asked why he couldn't just take a little drink, and Anko told him that not everyone wanted to become an immortal bloodsucker. She then placed a ring in the teacher's hand, and it caused him to freak out, but she held it in place and comforted him until the sun rose and put him out of his misery. Afterwards, she reintroduced herself as a special investigator with a deep hatred for vampires, but Ko got pissed and demanded to know why she immersed him. She then grabbed him by the collar and told him to stop thinking all vampires were cute before leaving them copies of her card in case they ever wanted to uncover the truth behind legends again. For most of that night, Ko was in bed thinking about what happened, and when he eventually went to see Nazuna, she immediately tried to get some blood, but he freaked out. She could immediately tell that something was up, so they went inside, and he told her all about Anko. After explaining that the teacher was just one of a few cases where transformed humans refused to accept their new reality, she took him out for a walk to clear his head. A few minutes later, he started to feel optimistic again and told her to take as much blood as she wanted. A couple of nights later, he escorted Maheru to deliver flowers to a customer with the juiciest pair of milkers Ko had ever seen. After she told him to work on hiding his obvious lack of control, Maheru took him aside to ask why he wanted to be a vampire. With everything that had already happened stressing him out, he struggled to come up with an answer, so Maheru told him to really think about the fact that he could end up like the teacher. Ko immediately went to see Nazuna after that and hugged her to see if that would give him clarity. Knowing that a regular conversation wouldn't work, she decided to visit his place for the first time, and that seemed to take some of the edge off. After joking about how small his room was, she asked if he was having second thoughts about becoming a vampire. Still confused by everything that had happened so far, he said it was all making him realize that being a vampire was more than sneaking out to have fun at night. She then told him that there was nothing really fun about it because they were basically immortals who would naturally get bored of everything and occasionally mess around with humans to pass the time. The next night, he called Anko to talk about what happened, and she initially tried to play dumb, but he kept asking why she was so against vampires. She then switched gears and said she was prepared to do absolutely anything to stop him from becoming a vampire. He didn't expect her to already know about that, so she reminded him of her job and pulled him close so he would understand what she meant by being ready to do anything. After pulling away and saying she was going to eliminate all the vampires, including him if he eventually went through with the transformation, she called the cops and gave them a description to make sneaking out a little more difficult. Ko immediately ran off to get home on time, but once he saw the police lights, he went to hide in the playground and was startled when Hatsuka suddenly showed up. Moments later, she took him back to her place where 3 new vampires she recently turned were eagerly waiting to get rewarded with her special creepy. After commanding them to get lost for the night, she left Ko in the living room to take a bath. He then spent a few minutes taking in the classy vibe of her place, but things took a weird turn when she called out to him to get a towel. Seeing that Hatsuka was actually a dude with a Magnum sausage left him paralyzed in a state of shock until he came out and said he thought Nazuna had already told him. At the time, she had just gotten to the same rooftop as before to tell Nico and girls that they had to give Ko a pass if he chose to remain human. Immediately pissed off by the balls she had to ask such a thing, Nico smashed the table, and Midori took a pic while telling her to cool off. Nico then told Nazuna to stop worrying about Ko because his fate had been sealed, but she refused and said she was ready to take them all at once. By then, Ko had just finished telling Hatsuka about Anko and the teacher, thinking he would help him get some clarity on the decision he had to make. Just then, Hatsuka got a text from Midori about the fight and told Ko, who then tried to leave. After stopping him and saying he was too weak to do anything on his own, Hatsuka offered to turn Ko so he could have a fighting chance because there was no way he would get emotionally mature enough to love Nazuna in time. Ko was confused because he also couldn't fall in love with him, but Hatsuka said he could brainwash him like he did to the 3 he chased off earlier. After giving it some thought, Ko still refused and said he only wanted to get turned by Nazuna before running off to help her. When he got to the rooftop, Nico told him she had already left and mentioned something about a special punishment she delivered. Hearing that, Ko got pissed and told her to stop interfering with their life before running off again to search for Nazuna. When he got to the bridge and saw the cop car still patrolling, he tried to hide, but 2 officers saw him and tried to get a word. Knowing they could easily catch up to him, he jumped off the bridge and ran as fast as he could. Moments later, Nazuna got to a vending machine and tried to get a beer, but Ko finally caught up to her and almost gave her a heart attack. He then asked if she was okay because of what Nico said earlier, but Nazuna swore she was fine and wanted to know why he was looking for her. Completely sure of what he wanted for once, he excitedly said he still wanted to be a vampire and was ready to go through the boring years with her. The shocked look on her face made him think it was all too much, so he apologized and tried to leave, but then she pulled him back for a steamy kiss. Will Ko actually manage to fall in love with her and get turned, or will Anko take them all out first? Comment vampire baddies if you enjoyed the video, and remember to turn on notifications after subscribing to see the next part.